What am I still doing wearing a bra? Hey guys, it's Michaela back again with another video, and it is, as I am recording this, May 1st. Where did April go? March took forever, but it was only April for like 5 minutes. I don't understand how time works now. But it is time for my April 2020 wrap-up. These are the books that I read in April 2020, which is, it's not a lot. I did not get to read as much this month as I would like to, and there's sort of a number of reasons for that. I think overall, from what I've heard from others in sort of like booky spaces, it seems to be very hard for people generally to read right now, to focus on reading, and I think that's fine. It's frustrating for me personally. I know I would love to be reading more than I am right now, but I can do what I can do, and this is what I could do this month. Working from home has also made it a little more difficult than usual, definitely more difficult than I thought it was going to be, to read from home, just because I need more time than I thought I would to sort of transition out of that workspace. Because normally when I work in the office, like as soon as I shut that computer down and I leave, I'm done, and it only takes me like the 10-15 minute drive home to be ready for it to be me time. But that is harder now when kind of all the time is me time and none of the time is me time. It's very, it's unsettling. So yeah, finding time to read, finding the headspace to read is definitely harder than finding the time to read. I've also been making time to find just like new loves and little joys in my life. I've been cooking a lot more, and particularly baking a lot more, which has been a lot of fun. I have discovered 2 new YouTube loves, and I'm just going to recommend them to you now. This has nothing to do with what I'm going to be talking about today, but I just want to share the joy. One of them is Cracking the Cryptic. They sort of went viral. I think James Charles tweeted about them or something like that. But they are a Sudoku solving channel, or just sort of like math puzzles in general, but like typically Sudoku and like Sudoku variants. I've only watched one of the 2 guys, Simon. I love him. He is like the Bob Ross of Sudoku, and I adore him. He gets so excited about these puzzles, and I'm so happy for him. So Cracking the Cryptic, and the other one is, I don't know how to pronounce it. It's like Gels or Jellies Marble Racing. I've only watched season 1 of Marbula 1, so like no spoilers for anything. But I got so into marble racing the other day. I was like screaming in my apartment. I miss sports so much. That's my secret that BookTube is not going to care about, but I love sports, and so like not having sports and not really having much sports news is hard. So marble racing, super up my alley. So I've been loving both of these things, so I hope they can bring you joy as well in this somewhat joyless time. But back to books, because that's what we're actually here to talk about. So these are the books that I read in April. There are 7 of them. This is definitely the least reading month that I have had so far in 2020. I did not read any comics, so I'm not even going to be talking about that, but I guess I will start talking about these. So this is going to be a short video because these 4 books, which comprise the Raven Cycle by Maggie Stiefvater, I did an entire read with me for this series, 1 read with me for each of these books. So if you want to know my more complete thoughts on them, I recommend you check those out. But I guess sort of the short of it is, it was fine. I didn't love it. I don't see it being a series that I will go back to. There were parts of it that I really enjoyed. Noah is the love of my life. I love Noah so much. I liked the character of Blue. I did not like her romance with Gansey because I didn't like Gansey, and also the romance didn't make sense. It came out of nowhere. Adam and Ronan are fine. Sure. I guess I ship them. I don't really care that much. And the plot didn't make a ton of sense. So I believe I gave the first and the third books 4 stars, and then the second and the 4th books 3 stars. Overall, I'd probably say this is like a 3-star series. It's fine, but I understand it's very popular, so I'm not going to talk anymore about it. What does this truck do? This truck comes by every day, and I don't know what they do in this complex. The next book I read was the collected poems of Emily Dickinson. This is a part of the Barnes & Noble Classics collection. So this one was difficult for me because as I was reading this, so on the day I am filming this, another video is going to go live, which is a video describing and discussing my aphantasia, which in a nutshell is my inability to see things visually in my mind, in my imagination. I do not have a visual imagination. When I close my eyes and imagine something, there are no images to accompany that imagination. It's more just like concepts. I go into much greater detail in that video. Please check it out because I say a lot and a lot more than I'm gonna say here. But I was going through that whole thing. I was going through that whole sort of discovery and coping process as I was reading this. So it took me forever. I could really only read 20, maybe 30 pages at a time, which, you know, it's poetry. And I know you're not supposed to just like sit down and read poetry like you read a normal prose text. I know this and I do it anyway. There were poems in here that just like straight up didn't make sense, which is like fine. There's like literally hundreds of poems in here. Some of them aren't gonna be stellar, like that's the way the world works. But then there are some in here that were just like absolutely gorgeous and just, oh my god, blew me away. So I gave this a 3 overall. Part of the reason probably why I didn't get a 4 was, again, I found that the notes were not helpful. They were not as annoying as the annotations for the Barnes & Noble Edgar Allan Poe collection, that is for sure. But, so these weren't annoying notes, they just also weren't very helpful. And there were times where, like, you know, Emily D would drop a word, I'm like, sweet pea, I don't know what that word means. And then that word wasn't defined, but then again, like, I don't know, like a much easier word would be defined. And of course I can't find one. Like I think diadem was defined. I'm like, that, I feel like people know that one. But then there'd be, I don't know. But I gave it a 3. I'm sure there will be individual poems or maybe sections that I will go back to. I'll probably go back to that, the first section, which is about life. I really liked that one. So there are parts of this I'm going to go back to, but will never just like sit down and read the whole thing again, which is fine. So like I said, 3 stars. The next book I read was Stay Sexy and Don't Get Murdered. Is there the definitive how-to guide? I don't know if that's like actually the subtitle. Youths. This one is by Karen Kilgariff and Georgia Hardstock, who are the co-hosts of the extremely famous true crime podcast, My Favorite Murder. I do love this podcast. I started listening to it in 2018, I believe. I think it was like sort of very beginning of 2018, and I like binged the entire back catalog very quickly. And that was before I discovered podcasts on 2 times speed. So I was listening to them on 1 time speed, and these podcasts are long. So it's a really great podcast. What I really love about the podcast and these women, and what they really get into and hear a lot, is how hard they have worked to become very good at learning from their mistakes. I think it is difficult for people to take criticism, especially when it comes without a face or a name online, when it just comes from someone saying like, hey, you fucked this up. That can be very difficult, even when the criticism is like valid and helpful and you know, good. It can still be hard to hear. And so they have worked hard over the years to not be as defensive. I know that some of the mistakes that they made early on, they did respond very defensively too, and like that did actually turn me off for a while. But I know that they've gotten better, and I know how hard they've worked at that. And just in general, how hard they have worked to become better people, to become better friends and women and like citizens of the world. And I think they really get into that here. They both acknowledge that they do have life experience and that can be helpful, as well as they are not professionals, and that, you know, they're just people really like anybody else. But this was such a well-written book. I was very surprised. I thought I would enjoy it, but I didn't know I was actually going to be like really enamored with it. I thought, you know, Karen's writing in particular was really good, but she also has been a writer sort of like professionally. But both of them very clearly wrote their own sections. Not that I thought that they wouldn't, but like I could hear their voices reading each section, like as I saw it back and forth, so clearly. Like you could have just read me a paragraph from either one of their any of their essays with no context, and I would be able to tell you who wrote it just because their voices are so specific. And so I really loved being able to like read the thing I hear, you know, every week. Do you need to listen to the podcast to read this book? I mean, no, but you're certainly not going to get the same level of enjoyment out of it that I think I did. This is sort of sprinkled through with lots of references to the podcast, to sort of their catchphrases or whatever. And it is very obviously written with their podcast audience in mind. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. This is an audience that, you know, has supported them and, you know, gotten them, you know, into the absolute like stratosphere of podcast celebrity. So I think, you know, it's kind of right of them to write with that audience in mind and to sort of write this as almost a love letter to that audience. So I recommend listening to the podcast just because it's good. I also recommend reading this book, sort of whether or not you listen to the podcast, because it is just a good book about life lessons. Yeah, their lives have looked very different from mine, and there aren't a ton of things that I in particular would take away from this, just because they're from a different time than I am. Yeah, like I said, different life experiences, different life struggles. But it was still entertaining as hell, and I learned a lot about them and a lot about life. So I recommend it. I gave this 4 stars. This last book, Challenger Deep by Neil Shusterman, I just finished last night. Wow. Like, holy shit. So this is my first Neil Shusterman book. I talked a bit in my TBR shelf tour that I had never read a Neil Shusterman before. Although I did get to meet him once and he was very kind. So when I picked this up, I really didn't know what to expect because I had never encountered his writing before, but this was amazing. The absolute artistry of vacillating between Caden's internal hallucinatory world and the real world, and how sort of like we fall down deep into this hallucination and then start to come back up, and it isn't until we start to come back up that we get to really understand how deep we were. And obviously the same is true for Caden. It's not until he gets help that he really understands how much he needed it, and even that takes a while. I mean, stunning metaphor, stunning language. I mean, the language is just unbelievable. I really appreciate it as a person with, as I stated, no visual imagination, how much the story and the metaphor and the relationship that Caden has to his mental illness did not rely on visual imagery. There was definitely visual imagery, and I'm sure that there are people who got more out of that part than I did because I couldn't see anything. But I still was never ever confused about what was going on this ship that Caden imagined himself to be on. You know, I was never confused, particularly once we transfer into his life in this mental institution and we get to sort of look back and see how there were threads connecting that we didn't even know were connecting. I never felt confused. I never felt lost. And this was just so intimate. I don't know the details, but I do remember one of the 2 YALLFests. So I've been to YALLFest 2018 and YALLFest 2019, and one of the 2 Neil Shusterman was supposed to be at, and he wasn't. He had to cancel last minute because of a family emergency with his son, and like sort of the consensus at YALLFest, or like people were talking about how his son is has a mental illness of some kind, and that is likely what was going on. And I don't know if that is the background for this book. This book came out in 2015. Do I do research? Absolutely not. You must be new. But whether or not Neil Shusterman's mental illness or a family member's mental illness or some personal connection to schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, and, you know, similar conditions, whether or not that played into this story, I felt that he knew what he was talking about. He was not talking out of his ass. He didn't just like WebMD these conditions. Like, it felt personal and it felt very specific to this one person. And yeah, it was just beautiful. I briefly considered that maybe this book was going to be a 4 because Caden's relationship with Callie in the institution, I thought it was going to become like a thing. And I was like, this is a story that absolutely 100 million% did not need a romance. And luckily that's not where the story went. It was more just like this temporary, not relationship, but like connection that they had that neither one of them really understood or knew what to do with. And then like very abruptly it was over and they both just kind of had to move on. And so I ended up liking it. But at first, when like we first see Caden and Callie sort of like get together or whatever you want to call it, I was like, oh no, please don't fucking do this. And he didn't, so thank God. But all of the characters were great. Caden was great. And yeah, I gave this 5 stars. I super loved it. I know it's not a new book, but yeah, if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. So those are the 7 books that I read in April. I am definitely hoping to do better in May. I am starting to get into a better headspace. I've been exercising more and sleeping better and just sort of getting onto a better routine. So I think I'm going to, in the future, be able to more deliberately set aside time for reading. But if you, like me, have found it difficult in this time of social distancing and quarantine or whatever we want to call it, if you've been finding it difficult to read, just be patient with yourself. It's gonna be fine. You know, if the thing that you need to do right now is watch like the Halloween heist episodes of Brooklyn Nine-Nine on repeat for like every day for a week, that's acceptable. That's an acceptable thing to do. It's weird to have there be so much uncertainty and yet to have every day look the same. That's weird. It's a weird thing to sort of reconcile inside our brains. So yeah, be patient with yourself, be patient with other people if they're not being as productive as you are or as you think they should be. We're all just trying to like fucking get through. So, you know, in April I got 7 books done, and maybe I'll get more done in May. I hope so. But you know, however many books you read, even if you just like read a chapter in May, I think that's fine. I think that's good. That's good enough. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for just continuing to take care of yourself and to take care of each other. And I hope to see you guys in the next one. Okay, bye.